All right, so we just heard about recovery in aviation from Linda and Alan, and now we're turning the focus to hospitality and the accommodation playbook for a smarter future. And joining me to talk about this today, we have Katherine Grass, who is CEO of Optii Solutions, as well as a venture partner at Thayer Ventures. Katherine, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Good morning. So I want to start with this idea of a playbook. You know, last May, Optii introduced a playbook designed to help hotels confront the challenges brought on by COVID. Now that we're in 2021, what does that playbook look like as it relates to recovery?
Yeah, we were quick to implement the playbook, as you mentioned, about a year ago. What could you do differently? How do you remove stayover cleans from the hotels? How do you audit trace new protocols that are being introduced? And how do you do all of that, smarter, better, seamless, without a lot of workarounds on the ground? And I think the playbook now continues to how do you develop flexibility? Flexibility is absolutely the name of the game in 2020 and 2021. And how do you make things simple and easy to use? I think this ease of use was an issue. Even in the best of times, it continues to be a critical component now in hotels. I think hotels have minimal staff levels. They have rotating staff. They've always had that. So how easy are your solutions to use? How easy are they to onboard? And is it giving you that flexibility to make and adapt to changes that you're going to have to do on a daily, weekly basis to help you do more with less, and not just do more with less, but do better with less, and not try to fight kind of against the solution to find these funky workarounds.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned doing more with less, and technology is a big component of doing more with less. And I think a lot of hotels know the benefits of becoming safer and seamless. They see that, but what are some of the biggest challenges in actually implementing a tech-focused solution, and what should they be thinking about prioritizing for, say, your 50-bed hotel? What should your priorities be?
Yeah, I think some of the cleaning protocols are settling down, and I think the best way to make impacts the best way to cause impact and to drive value is to really understand what you're doing and the impact that it has. So how can you measure that impact? Are you doing things that save you time and save you money? And when you make changes, and even when you remove things, you think by removing processes, removing steps, that you're ultimately saving money. And sometimes that's not the case. So are you able to make a change and measure its impact? Even measure or understand the downstream impacts of that. And can that solution help you make those smarter choices, or maybe try one or two different ways of how to do things and see what the impacts are? So I think that, again, it goes back to that flexibility and the ability to measure and understand the information and the data of the decisions that you're making to make sure you're making the best choices.
Yeah, and I'm curious on the flip side of that, have you seen hotels in this COVID period maybe not make the smartest investments, where they think they need some solution for something, it turns out they don't? Have you seen any of that at all?
Well, for sure, we've seen trial and error, and that's understandable, right? We're all trying to figure this out. We're still trying to figure it out. I would say I think when we think of seamless and contactless, I think that also, to me, means smarter, right? So hotels, many race to make interactions contactless. But sometimes those contactless interactions weren't necessarily seamless. And for those of us who've maybe stayed in a hotel recently, I think an example of that are how some hotels have implemented chat solutions to be contactless interacting with the guests. but some of those chat solutions on the back end require staff to actually chat back. And staff are at such minimal levels already in the hotels that guests are trying to chat and ask a question, but they're actually not getting a response back. So that's just one example of a solution that we have to be cautious of, that when we implement these, even though they seem contactless, are they smarter? Are they efficient? And to understand the implementation impact and kind of the follow through of any solution that you're introducing.
I want to dig into the touchless and the contactless bit of more around cleaning specifically. How should hotels be thinking about cleanliness and hygiene? Is it about disinfecting? Is it about social distance? Is it about air circulation and quality? Turnover time per room? How should they really be thinking about that and also making those protocols efficient?
Yeah. So I think that on the cleaning protocols, I think it's settling down a little bit. At the very beginning, we didn't know, how necessarily COVID was being transmitted. We didn't have maybe the best way to audit, trace even what was happening to be able to ensure that what we do wasn't creating any issues. And so as that starts to settle down a bit and we understand, I think the hotels are doing a better job of not only implementing their cleaning protocols very much around, I think, the airborne side and making sure that the distance is there, making sure that there's signage up about only one family or guest in the elevators at a time, or maintaining more outdoor seating or spaces within the lobby, but also able to measure those impacts of the cleaning protocols that they're doing, and being able to audit trace if there ever is a problem. So, and it's not just about the things that they are changing and eliminating, but again, trying to understand what the downstream impacts of those. And I think maybe a clear example that we've seen, a lot of hotels are still in the US, not globally, have eliminated stay-over cleans. That was really just to reduce contact in the rooms. That was also because of reducing staff on site. And now what some of the hotels are seeing is that's impacting the guest experience. If the guest's not in the room, that they would prefer some sort of service. And because if you're not servicing a room for many, many days, the numbers are also pointing to the fact that when they do finally do the service at the end of a stay, it's a lot more laborious, and it's actually taking a lot longer if they had done some touch-ups along the way. So how to fold in those protocols that are and those processes, ensuring that you're maintaining that distance, which I think has been probably the first and foremost, and then that just thorough cleaning is being done in the rooms more than anything else, has been a big focus for the hotels that we've seen.
Yeah, and so, the idea of a safer and seamless environment in hospitality isn't just about the actual guests. There's a staff component as well. And you made a comment in the past calling this new world a much more hostile place for those working in hospitality. Can you elaborate a little on what you mean by that and what hotels need to keep in mind about keeping their staff safe?
So I think maybe the hostile is a bit more from the angle that that the guest interaction is changing, right? And especially as we move from maybe the more contactless way to interact with guests and not having that face-to-face guest interaction as much that we're used to. Sometimes that's perceived as maybe more sterile. And well, we hope things are sterile in the hotels, especially now with COVID, maybe in the sense of less guest interactions being perceived as a bit more sterile. So I think the hotels are trying to strike, and they're finding this balance of how to create interactions or delight the guests, but not relying on just the face-to-face way of interacting to give this sense of a cold and hostile environment. And so that how they communicate is key. Not all that communication has to be face-to-face, but back to that chat interaction. If someone chats with you and you can chat right back and delight and answer their questions versus just not respond, that's that hostile or inefficient interaction with technology.
Yeah, you certainly don't want to lose that human touch, which is, one of the major perks of traveling is to have that interaction and to have hospitality workers, greet you, give you things, it's all part of it. And it's kind of hard to balance those two when you are also trying to be as safe as possible. So. Right. Do you have any examples of hospitality brands doing a particularly good job at keeping things safe and seamless while also keeping their service up to standards?
Yeah, there's been quite a few, and I think this automation is not cold, right? And this is where that balance is really important. That the automation should help. If you request something, it should happen. And I think we've seen, Hilton did a really good job right out of the gate. And this is, back 12 months ago, they partnered with some others. Some of the big brands brought in, outside parties, third parties to verify what they were doing, especially in the age when we were trying to still figure that out. I think they did a really good job. And beyond the brands, I think what we have seen, especially in the US, has been the resorts. I would say like resorts in general, not necessarily brands here, but in general, they have been having better occupancy. And they have been experimenting around how to service the guest in different ways and in better ways, because that is where people are looking for that escape, but looking for that safe escape. I think, and I mentioned the stayover cleans. What we've seen globally is that the U.S. was quick to reduce some of the services. Globally, we haven't seen that as much. They're finding how to strike that balance, realizing that how they service a guest is still really critical, and how they can ensure this automation does what it's supposed to do, helps with audit tracing, but also is really delighting the guest more. And if you think about it, and some of the things that the hotels are talking about and thinking about is, if a guest is still in a room and they're still getting ready for the morning, instead of getting that knock on the door, housekeeping, are you still there? Maybe a guest can see when their housekeeper is coming and they can snooze that clean. Or if they're down by the pool and they need to pop up to the room, they could see that actually their room is being serviced, so they're going to stay a bit longer and have a drink. And these are some of the great things that the resort properties are thinking of, and as we think about how things work, and I think are probably leading the way on some of those guest interactions, just because people are looking to stay at the properties and interact and use the services as much as possible in these times.
Great. If you hear a background noise, they're doing construction on my building, so apologies to the audience. So how should hotels go about communicating the seamless and safeless contactless measures that they're taking? How can they communicate that to guests through each part of their journey, in the booking phase, when they're checking in, when they're in stay? And, if there is an intermediary in that process, what responsibility do they have to communicate? How are they sort of getting this messaging out there in an effective way? Yeah.
I think the intermediary has always been a bit of a struggle, even the best of times. So when these more ad hoc situations come up of additional information, sometimes we struggle in how to communicate that. And I think these are the times that over communication is absolutely key. So any problems that existed in kind of the status quo only continue to get highlighted. So how a hotel communicates on property, even in the room, some hotels really look to remove flyers and paper, anything tactile in the room. I think we need to think about how we add some of that stuff back, on their website, and in any way they can, because as these protocols change, and even the hotels are sometimes experimenting with what to add, what to offer. Some sorts of services are guest request only. It isn't clear. So they can't just rely on their website to outline that. They need to do this in multiple ways.
Great. And then I want to turn a bit to how hotels are working with other stakeholders, such as airlines or governments, which we heard a lot about from Gloria and Alan. Where do hotels fit in that mix, and to ensure they're complying with other measures that are being taken across the travel ecosystem?
Wow, I was listening to that earlier. The airlines have a tough challenge, and especially with how to implement any regulation that's coming down. I think we're still, from the hotel angle, still trying to figure this out. In some countries, hotels are being used as even quarantine hotels. That seems to be a bit more standard in terms of how they're going to interact with the government, how they're going to interact with the airlines, and how they're going to ensure very strict governmental protocols are being followed. Beyond that, we are seeing probably less interaction in more in other parts of the world. The hotels are trying to implement the processes and the procedures that they legally and from potentially brand standard need and want to implement, but how that then gets communicated with an airline or with governments, we haven't seen any sort of standard way to do this yet.
We've got time for a couple more questions here. I wondered if you could talk a bit on the importance of staff training and aligning that perhaps with a company culture, the hotel's culture, and how can that element help implement these new safer and seamless practices?
Yeah. As I mentioned, in the best of times, training has always been absolutely key, because you have high staff turnover, and in these times that is certainly no different. Even more difficult. So how you make your onboarding with staff, how you can onboard them to a solution that's as easy to use as possible. We have to think of who our users are in this case. A lot of times in the operational field, these are not tech savvy users. So that ease of use is absolutely critical. Video snippets to how they use the system, big numbers, big buttons, very clear. And I think that onboarding, when you look at technology and when you look at solutions, how well it helps you day in and day out is clearly critical. But how easy is that onboarding, and how insightful and supported is that solution afterwards? And those are equally critical. And so we at Optii have done a tremendous amount of effort to make remote onboarding seamless, to make training snippets as easy as possible, to be in constant communication with the people on the ground to ensure that everyone is up and running. And I think we're going to see that across the solutions, and we stress that. And back to your question about IT solutions and which ones to implement, a hotel needs to equally look at onboarding and ease of use out of the box, but the support that they're going to get as well, before they jump into any of these potentially new solutions that are on the market.
All right, so I want to wrap this up with changing gears again a bit to your investor hat, if we could. For startups, where are there opportunities in the hospitality market right now?
It is a challenge out there, and I think where can you add value? It is for new ideas. a lot of the hotels are delaying buying decisions. Are you able to offer something that allows them to save time and save money? I think this is absolutely first and foremost. But beyond that, I think the bigger advice to some of these startups is how they're funding and how they're making it through the next 12 months. So beyond the idea and understanding your target market and understanding your product market fit, the timing has become immensely unpredictable. So there's just buying decisions that are being potentially delayed or becoming more complicated. So think about, how can you make it through these next 12 months in terms of funding? A lot of investors are, let's say, doubling down or really protecting their current portfolio. So they're not investing necessarily in a lot of new ones, or if they are, they're looking for that bargain. So beyond that, and being convinced that your idea is the right one, the timing is just so complicated right now. So just think about how you can navigate through these next, I think, really 12 months.
All right, we are at time for this today, but Katherine, thank you again so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. And we'll hand it back over to Kevin.
Thank you.